obvious. I mean, everybody could see that has two eyes and two neurons, that men cannot become women and vice versa. And that it's just not fair to have some grown man who's post adolescence competing in women's sports. Nobody thinks that's okay.
Michael Shermer is a science writer, historian of science, and the publisher of Skeptic Magazine. Michael was a monthly columnist at Scientific American for nearly 18 years, but recently the publication has been ideologically captured by progressive activists. Michael, welcome to my program.
Nice to see you, Ayaan. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to start by asking you, for those who don't know the story behind the departure of Laura Helmuth, the editor-in-chief of Scientific American, can you explain what happened?
So I started writing for Scientific American in April of 2001, and I didn't leave. They terminated my column, which they were free to do. It was just a yearly contract I had with them that they just chose not to renew. And I saw the writings on the wall toward the end of my 18-year run. That was 214 consecutive monthly columns I did, when I started getting some pushback for some pretty minor trivial things that I had said. In one of them, my columns, I had talked about counterfactuals and evidence that goes against a hypothesis. In this case, the idea that abusive parents to their children were themselves abused as children. This is a hypothesis that some psychologists have floated. And I just pointed out that could be true, but what about all the children who were abused that grew up to be loving parents and not abusive? Or what about the abusive parents who didn't grow up being abused? These are the counterfactuals. And I just used some fun examples of that, explaining it. But my editor said, "Hey, we can't. You're excusing child abuse." I'm like, "No, I'm trying to explain. We're in search of the cause of child abuse. I'm not saying it's not harmful or that it's okay." And so I kind of had to modify it a little bit, really kind of just playing with the language so as not to offend anybody was clearly that. And then the next one after that, I wanted to write about race and how, even though there are still examples of racism in the world and in America. It's our original sin and all that. It hasn't gone away. It's not zero. But I just want to point out, people like myself and Steven Pinker and others have written that, things are much better. This is not the 1950s anymore. And, we should congratulate ourselves on figuring out how to do something right. And they basically said, you're going to have to rewrite this completely because we can't publish this. This is just, you're saying everything is great. I'm like, no, I'm just saying it's better than it used to be. Anyway, so then I thought, oh boy, I have a bad feeling about the future of my column. And sure enough, like a month later, I got an email saying, you have one more column left and that's it. We're not renewing your contract. So I just wrote a kind of generic final one. So that was not under Laura Helmuth. That was under Mariette DiChristina, who was the first female editor-in-chief of Scientific American. And I'm pretty sure she was not on board with any of that. These were other editors who were tweaking my columns. And then she left to become a professor and dean at Boston University School of Journalism and Communication. And that's when Laura Helmuth came in. So she came in after I was gone. So I don't actually know her. I didn't work with her. But you could see just by looking at the stuff that's been published under her tutelage, how far woke Scientific American has gone, and it's pretty tragic. This magazine, it's over 150 years old. It's the oldest continuously published magazine in the United States, and it's tragic.
Am I blaspheming if I say that she was a DEI hire?
That I don't know. I mean, DEI hire. She is pretty woke.
Yeah.
I mean, she's not a person of color. I don't know much about her.
She's a woman, and DEI
She's a
means
woman.
that it's other things like they say diversity, equity, and inclusion. But in any case, those traits matter much more than whether you're qualified for the job or not.
Yes, well, she has a PhD. I mean, she should be qualified. She's a science writer. She should be qualified. One of the tragic things I saw unfolding after I left was a lot of people saying this is what happens when you put a woman in charge of a science magazine. Well, there was a woman in charge, Meredith DiChristina. She was
Yes.
fabulous. She was not woke. So it's not being female or whatever. It's the wokeness. It's the ideology. It's the
It's the
belief.
ideology, and there are very, very qualified women. Like, talk about Amy Wax and what they've done to her, and many other women who are absolutely qualified. It isn't about the women or the blacks or the groups that they say they want to
Right.
protect. Yeah.
Yeah.
So these two incidents that you described with your columns, was that the first time you got wind of it, or is there,
Yeah.
were there warning signs before that where the world was heading?
No, not really, because I mean, I live in California. Their offices are in New York, so I wasn't there to see things unfolding on a day-to-day basis with other editorial decisions. But for me, there were no signs at all. No, I mean, I wrote 212 consecutive columns without any pushback. Really, they let me say whatever I want, even on abortion. I mean, I wrote about a lot of controversial topics, not just pseudoscience and psychics and UFOs and stuff like that, but serious issues. This was never a problem. And
But I mean, I don't mean only with you. I mean, just generally speaking, even with your colleagues and in the whole science community, were there any?
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. I
Yeah.
would say it all started around maybe 2015, 2016. Just along with the other cultural trends that you're aware of DEI and wokeness, and this kind of concerns about people's feelings, microaggressions, safe spaces, all those things we've seen on college campuses, have infiltrated all the sciences now, even
Yeah.
physics.
Yeah.
And much debate about why aren't there more women and people of color in mathematics and engineering, the STEM fields. And so the immediate hypothesis is that it must be because there's a bunch of racists and misogynists in mathematics and engineering and physics and so on. And so that was the subject of my very first Substack skeptic column. I just kept the column going through Substack, thanks to them. Just pointing out that, in fact, there's lots of fields where women dominate. Here, I just put some of them. Like, these are doctoral degrees by field and gender. So in public administration, women earn 74% of all the PhDs.
Yeah.
Health and medical sciences, 71% dominated by women. Education, 68%. Social and behavioral science, 61%. Arts and humanities, 52%. Biological and agricultural sciences, women earn 51.4% of all the PhDs.
What about
So
law?
why is
What
so
about
why
law?
is it?
Because there are lots of women lawyers. I thought that women were.
Yes, and law. Well, so I didn't in my data search. I didn't. Yeah, I think law schools. I think there's more females now, and
Yeah.
also medical school. So why is nobody? So this is the counterfactual. Why is nobody saying there is an anti-male bias in whatever biology, medicine, law, whatever? And it's obvious that because that's not the hypothesis. It can only go the other direction.
Yeah. Yeah, that is. I'm very, very aware of the ideology. It's just that for a long time, I think we were kidding ourselves that the hard sciences was immune from that.
Yes, I just was posting an example from Sabine Hassenfelder, the physicist.
Yeah.
Where she posted on Twitter that she wrote a research proposal about inflation in the early universe, not your supermarket, and it bounced back because I didn't explain its relevance to sex, gender, and diversity. In other words, she's studying like the early universe and black holes and the Big Bang, and the granting agency wants to know how's this going to help people of color and gender and
Yeah.
and she's like, what do I plug in there? I mean, there must be like magic words that you use.
Yeah. I think people like Peter Boghossian would know exactly what it is that you would plug in there.
That's right. Yeah, you just make up stuff.
He
right?
makes up stuff, yeah. So the editors of Science Magazine, they've thrown their weight behind, the big issue, youth, gender, medicine, and trans lobby. And they claim that this gender-affirming care for trans kids is good health care and that biological sex is on a spectrum. Do other scientific and academic institutions look to Scientific American as a guideline for their own practices? So what I'm asking is basically, how influential is it?
Well, Scientific American is certainly influential to the general public, but the other medical, like JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, and other leading scientific journals, Nature and Science themselves have gone fairly far woke. And those are the publications that are highly influential. So what trickles down to the public is, let's say, since you brought that example up, that biological sex is on a spectrum. Well, where did this idea come from? Well, there's some biologist who said so, and so on. So when you see people like Bill Nye, the science guy, say, sex is on a spectrum, that's mildly influential, but not nearly so much as when you actually have medical doctors and biological researchers saying this, and they are. Not everybody.
Yeah.
It's hard to get data on how many people actually believe that men can become women and vice versa. But it's probably a minority of scientists that actually believe it. But because of cancel culture, they're afraid to speak up. So
Yeah.
one of the things I'm trying to do is get people to speak up and say, no, this is not true. Gender is different than sex, and let's be clear about what we're talking about here. So that's the influence, is that then medical institutions that practice gender affirming care, let's say, even that term is problematic. They kind of want to go along with it just in case there might be something to it, and if you speak up, you'll be accused of being transphobe, and no one wants that to harass their lives. I mean, I know several scientists who don't believe any of this stuff, but they're and I encourage them to speak out. These are famous, world famous scientists. You would know them if I said their names, but they're afraid to say anything.
Yeah.
I mean, one of them told me, "I just want to keep my head down. I don't go to committee meetings anymore. I don't go to faculty meetings. I stay home, just go in and teach my class and go home. I just don't want anything to do with it." It's like, oh man.
So there is now what we are calling a vibe shift. There is, the re-election of Donald Trump, and there's a whole complex set of reasons why he's re-elected. But one of them is that people are really tired of woke and wokeism. So in my community, my Silicon Valley friends, tech titans who are always, forever Democrats and gave money to Democrats. For them, the key reason that they left is it's this trend. It's this diversity, equity, and inclusion, all these other destructive things. So do you think that with this shift, the science community is going to be emboldened? These famous scientists who are now keeping their heads down, that they'll be emboldened to stand up and say, this is enough. We've got to reclaim our disciplines.
I'm hoping. Yes, I agree with you. I think the re-election of Donald Trump is probably overdetermined of different ideas, but that's certainly one of them. I mean, that one's been pretty openly discussed. That is, centrists and just even left of center people have had enough of the DEI and wokeness. I mean, everybody could see that has two eyes and two neurons, that men cannot become women and vice versa. And that is just not fair to have some grown man who's post adolescence competing in women's sports. Nobody thinks that's okay, or at least most rational people don't believe that. But again, they keep their mouth shut. So with Trump taking office here, I think that's going to turn the tide. I'm hoping. The trans thing, I've been following that. We follow that in Skeptic pretty closely. The numbers spiked since, say, 2014, 2015 of self-identified trans, more girls becoming boys and vice versa. But there's comorbidities there: adolescence, depression, anxiety, and just kind of going through the normal turmoil of adolescence, and then taking on those roles because that's what's popular in their community, in their cohort. So we call that the social contagion hypothesis. And I think it's already spiked, and I think it's going to start heading down. That is the number of people self-identifying as trans. I'm predicting that by 2030, it'll be back down to where it was, say, in 2015, because of all this.
There's the contagion among the kids, and obviously it's, there's an ideology that's driven actively. So let's say the ideologues and then the kids. With gender dysphoria, and some of them with other issues that think that they have gender dysphoria. I think that's all well documented and properly discussed. But would you say there's a conspiracy? I mean, I can see right behind you one of your books, Conspiracy, where you
Yeah.
look into these things. You say there's a conspiracy. I mean, I've had stories about, pharmaceutical companies, people, just good old cynical money making, decision making behind keeping this thing alive and trying to spread it to as many kids as possible.
Yes, I have a neurosurgeon friend who works with a community of surgeons in different fields. And he told me one day one of them came in, this was maybe 5 years ago. And it's like, hey, there's this new thing. We got to get in on it. There's big money in the trans, medicine industry. And my friend's like, what? We
Yeah.
can't do that. And they're like, yeah, but everybody else is doing it. So it may take some top-down legislation of just saying you cannot do this to minors anymore.
Yeah.
I hate to do that. I'm kind of a libertarian. I don't like big government telling people what they can and cannot do. But in the case of minors, we already have laws. They're not allowed to drink. They can't vote. They can't go in the military. They can't get tattoos and without parental consent and all this kind of stuff. So why not this? And the argument is that they have to transition before they go through puberty, or else it's too late. So this is the argument. And the evidence for this is pretty mixed. The European and UK medical institutions have now started to turn against that idea that the data was never very good. That has to be done,
Yeah.
and that the whole claim that they'll commit suicide if you don't affirm their gender care, it looks to be a shibboleth. That was never true. I mean, kids maybe have suicidal ideation for other reasons,
Yeah.
just the normal reasons that kids have, but because of the social contagion idea they have in their head, this is the reason I feel bad. And I have to say, just reflecting, it's the strangest thing. It's almost like a Cartesian dualism. Like we're back to the soul. There's a female soul floating around in my male brain, and it landed in the wrong body.
Yeah.
And I can't go to another body, so I have to change this body. I mean, it's just a bizarre idea that no scientist before, I don't know, 10 years ago would have ever gone along with this. But now, because it's more acceptable, we have this dialogue.
I think it's a topic for our next conversation, but I think religion may have to do a lot with this, and maybe the waning of Christianity, but also other sort of those big world religions that kept kids, kept young people, kept people anchored in a sense of what you can't get materially, or if you get everything you need materially, and then you have these
Mm.
other desires. There was
That's an actual, yeah, that's the replacement theory, right? That religion in decline is replaced by woke ideology. Maybe that may be the case in some. It's a testable hypothesis. We can discuss that elsewhere. But I do think that religion provides a foundation for people that kind of stabilizes them through those turbulent, sorry, turbulent years of adolescence. And it could be that in some cases that kind of woke ideology fills that gap. But yeah,
and again, it's more complex than just that. There are communities that have, for whatever reason, disintegrated. There is social media and there's the smartphone, and the fact that a lot of children spend time alone on their smartphones and on their social media accounts instead of actually playing with other children. There's just lots of it's more
yeah,
complex than just
yeah,
than that.
yeah.
To go back to Science Magazine, I mean, publications like Science Magazine, well, really once great. Is that era over of having this sense of platforms that we trust? We just took it for granted that we trust these publications. Are they gone? Can it be restored? What's going to replace it if they simply fall and dissolve and go away? And I mean, I could
Well,
ask
what?
not just about Science Magazine, but you could
Yeah,
ask it
yeah.
about, say, the New York Times or.
Yes, well, there's two forces at work here. Yes, it could be turned around if they, replace the woke editors with non-woke editors and convince the readers to come back. Or alternatively, the market will solve the problem of other people stepping in, like Barry Weiss's Free Press and
Yeah.
Quillette magazine and others. They just stepped in and said, we're going to start publishing now, and they're not going to be woke articles. They're going to be, actual factual driven, rationality based articles. And, their success at that is a sign that the market is ripe for that. So, I mean, science, Scientific American Science, Nature, they're so big that they could probably carry on for years financially without having to course correct too much. But I would like to see them course correct because they have a huge influence. And you mentioned trust. Yeah, but people don't trust these science magazines anymore. They don't trust the medical institutions. The whole thing with Fauci and Francis Collins and the COVID-19 response, that was a disaster for just trust.
Yeah.
Such that even if now they go, okay, well, we were wrong about that, we're going to course correct and go back. I think people are going to say, yeah, maybe we'll wait and see.
I think also we need a little bit of courage to come from, the giants who are now keeping their heads down. They could publish on Free Press instead of Scientific Magazine. And
yeah,
and I know Barry would publish them in a heartbeat.
Yes, and some of that is happening, and there are enough people speaking up, like Richard Dawkins and Jerry Coyne and myself and others. But we get hammered.
I know.
I don't mind because I'm independent. I work for Skeptic Magazine, my magazine, so I can't be fired.
Yeah.
And most of my readers, they support what we do. So I do, but I do feel sorry. Well, if I imagine if I was a 35-year-old assistant or associate professor at a university and I didn't have tenure, I can't say I would speak out. Maybe I would want to just keep my head down. But there are so many people that do have tenure; they can speak out. I'm trying to get enough of them so we get a turning point. You don't need everybody.
Yeah.
You just need enough people that you get a tipping point. It's the common knowledge problem with the boy who pointed to the emperor who has no clothes. If enough people point and go, this is nonsense, and then everybody else will go, yeah, okay, all right. So I'll speak out too. And then the minority of people who truly believe the ideology, then they will not have that kind of power that they have had just through cancel culture threats and things like that.
Yeah. So how is your magazine doing? Are you seeing an uptick in subscribers since the rise of wokeism, in the sense that people are shifting away from these magazines that have gone woke to you?
Yeah, Skeptic's doing pretty well. And, also we're a nonprofit, so we also get donations. And I get a lot of donations that say, this is because you've stood up to the woke nonsense. I'm like, okay. Now, I know I've lost some. I have a few people write me saying, oh, I'm really unhappy you went on this trans stuff. It's like, but we've already done UFOs and aliens and psychics and astrology. I mean, come on, this is way more important.
Yeah.
You have, hundreds of thousands of children are at risk.
Right.
And it's not a moral panic. Every time my woke progressive friends send me, you're just perpetuating a more right-wing moral panic. And then I send them article after article after article of, a sports example or a detransitioner. There's, hundreds of these detransitioners now, these young adults who no longer have their bodies the way they used to be, and they want them back, and it's too late. And it's not a moral panic. And even if it was, how many does it take before you stand up and go, you know what? We're not going to do this to minors anymore. We're not going to allow men and women's sports anymore.
Yeah.
And, what happened to Believe the Women? Me Too movement isn't that old.
Yeah.
And so now when women like Riley Gaines and others, not just her, say, I don't really want men in the locker room when I'm naked putting on my bathing suit. And people that I know who are, true hardcore liberals who 5 years ago would have been appalled at the idea of some guy standing there looking at a naked woman in a dress in the locker room.
And there have been really brave women like Abigail Shrier, J.K. Rowling, Julie Bindel. I mean, a bunch of really persistent women and men. I think Wesley Yang, Michael Schellenberger. There have been a number of people who stood up to them. But what I've been missing is, a widespread feminist march against this, not just for girls and women, but just for children. I mean, we don't have organized groups that are dedicated to just protecting the interests of children. And I don't understand that.
Indeed, yes. And well, so feminism, that's the second wave feminists who are now going, wait a minute, wait a minute. I'm not on board with all this DEI and woke stuff. But the third wave feminists, I guess is the correct term, these are
Yeah.
younger women in their, say, 20s. So what is going on there? I've been giving some thought to this, Ayaan. I think in part it's a proxy or a sign of how much moral progress we've made, that civil rights and women's rights and gay rights and so on, and younger adults thinking, well, I want to get in on this. I want to do something to make the world a better place. What's the next movement? We have gay rights. Oh, trans rights. Well, that's got to be the next thing. I really should support this. And I but it's just a different thing. Trans is not the same as being gay. I mean, who you identify as versus who you're attracted to are not the same thing. It's not just a continuation of it. But I think that's the sense. Like, I want to be a good person. I want to promote, moral values. I want to continue to, expand push the arc of the moral universe and all that stuff. And I want to get in on this, right?
Yeah.
And I think some of it's that, or just like the BLM movement.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, there's this one bad cop and this bad thing happened, and there's the video, and it's infuriating to watch those things. And what can I do about it? Well, there's a march tomorrow, and we're going to go down there and protest, and maybe we'll throw some rocks through the Starbucks window and or something. And it's like, yeah, I'm going to get in on that. I think young people are energized and they feel like they want to do something without thinking it through.
That's absolutely true. And there were two trends. One is that critical thinking in universities and in schools has been, that's what's been challenged by the woke. So people are too afraid to think. And I think some of these young people have been indoctrinated instead of thinking critically about, is this really a civil rights movement or is this something else? To even pose the question would get you cancelled. So it was a lot of programming of young people. But there's also bad money, like bad philanthropy. If we go back to the discussion on Science Magazine and universities, we know of all this so-called evidence-seeking funding that's supposed to produce peer-reviewed papers and other publications. Can you give us some sense of how pervasive this is? And do you know of other examples that are
Well,
infecting
certainly, yeah.
sciences?
I mean, funding agencies play a huge role, and they've also gone woke. I mentioned that Sabine Hassenfelder. That's just one amusing example. But other physicists like Lawrence Krauss has been writing about this for years in the Wall Street Journal. And by the way, when my woke friends go, well, you're only sending me articles from right-wing publications.
Yeah.
It's like, well, why isn't the New York Times covering this?
Yeah.
And finally, they are. They published a few things about the harm of gender affirming care, but not much. And it's like, well, or how come you're not showing me clips from CNN? Well, how come it's only Fox News? And my rebuttals is, how come it takes Fox News to cover this problem? Really, you're turning over free speech issues and cancel culture issues to the right wing? I mean, that's on you. And in any case, so funding agencies, if the people making the decisions, you got 100 applications and you can give out 10 large grants, you're going to pick the ones, if that's your ideology, you're going to pick the ones that kind of go in that direction. That's how it works. It's a kind of conspiracy, although it's a little more out in the open. Like, this is what we're doing. And, a lot of, like, as Lawrence Krauss has identified in many examples, is that you have people, scientists, trying to write into their grant proposals some language of DEI that will get them the money, even if they don't believe it.
Yeah.
Right. So this is another interesting problem called pluralistic ignorance, or the spiral of silence. Well, everybody thinks everybody else believes something when in fact they don't. And until enough people speak out, everybody thinks, well, I guess everybody else believes in this DI stuff, so I'll just go along with it. And then this could hover for years in the ether until finally somebody does something. I think that could happen in the next 5 years.
And I think maybe the way to go now is to spell out the kind of harm that will cause, especially in the sciences, when just, in America, we'll fall behind. We're always leading in all of these scientific endeavors in innovation. But if we're only publishing what, I don't know, some crazy philanthropist tells us to publish, or we're bullied by the woke into silence, or into doing, embarking on some propaganda pathway, I think it's important to spell out what that would mean for us as a society, what that would mean for Western civilization, and really awaken people into, it isn't just, I'm going to keep my head down and it's going to pass. I'm just going to pay my mortgage and take care of my kids. The impact can be huge and regressive.
And certainly liberals are quite aware of funding biases, like in the 60s and 70s research on lung cancer and tobacco. And big tobacco companies are funding research showing there's no link between smoking and lung cancer. And everybody's like, aha, you see, funding can really distort scientific research. But what if it's not like a George Soros private funder agency? What if it's the federal government funding agencies that has the bias? And that's the problem. Because they're in their head, they're not biased at all.
No, there was this incredibly, in my view, sick and corrupt relationship between some of these corporations, universities, and the government, where it began in a very healthy way. It was a way of bringing funding for really big projects, and they were very successful in the beginning. But then later on, it morphed into these, corruption seeps into these things, and there must be a way of introducing forms of accountability and transparency.
That's going to take two prong, but top down and bottom up. Bottom up, just again, enough of us speaking out to put an end to that pluralistic ignorance or that spiral of silence. But also, unfortunately, we're going to need some top down laws, and I think it may take somebody like the Trump administration to do that. And when my liberal friends, they're going to complain about this, but it's going to be like, why did it take Trump to do this? To course correct this insanity? That's on you. How come the Democrats didn't stand up and do something about it?
Well, I tell my friends who don't like Trump, I just say, who have TDS, it's not Trump, it's Doge, it's Elon and Vivek.
Yeah, right. There you go.
we just want transparency, and we're very happy that anyone will do it. Why would you be mad at Trump if he's doing the right thing?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I think there's one other factor too I might mention. A deeper foundational belief behind this is the blank slate. That is to say that human nature is almost all determined by culture and environment. And if you believe that, then we can socially engineer anything we want. What do we want? Well, we want an equal society. Well, yeah, I want an equal society, but hang on, what do you mean by that word equal?
Yeah.
So this is the stuff between equality and equity, equality of outcomes. This is, again, another one of these unfortunate misdirections. This is the kind of society we want, where everybody has the same amount of stuff. No, that isn't. Or you have a perfect outcome. 50% of all physicists are women, or 13% of all physicists are people of color.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work that way. And it may have nothing to do with intelligence, because everybody's afraid that's going to be the explanation. And it isn't. It's just vocational interest differences, or background, or whatever that leads you down.
It's human nature. I'm actually working on a little presentation where I was looking for a phrase, some kind of label for the perspective on human nature that you're explaining now, and I just call it the rosy-colored, the rosy-eyed, or the rosy perspective on human nature. Mm-hmm. Humans, it's a blank slate. They're all innocent. When they're born, it's society that makes them deranged. And I think that theory that you described it so well just now, is such a detachment from reality. And that's what has that's given birth to woke-ism, socialism, all of these terrible ideas where they think that you can actually separate the human being from the human being's nature. If we're a blank slate, and if we're only just good, then I don't think we're human. To be human is to have, as an individual in you, good and bad, and then to be civilized is to know that it's there and to suppress it. And if you can't do it, you're met. There's the law, and And there are institutions that civilize you, education, and I think religion is a big one. Um, it's,
Yes,
yeah, society.
Burkean conservatism, that is Edmund Burke's, the original conservative thinker of the 18th century, really
Edmund, yeah.
identified the problem is that these institutions we've evolved over the centuries, religion, the rule of law, courts, a government that's strong, has a legitimate use of threat of force to get people to behave and so on. You have to have that. And if this was his support of the American Revolution because it was done legally and so on with the Constitution versus the French Revolution, where they just said, let's just tear the whole thing down and start over.
Yeah.
Well, this is my concern about the woke movement is like
Yeah.
they just want to tear everything down and start over. It's like, no, this has a bad history to it. But again, that gets back to this blank slate. If you think that people are completely malleable, you can make them anything you want. You can make a man a woman and vice versa. You can make everybody equally intelligent, equally the same on all personality characteristics like conscientiousness and so forth. Then the only thing stopping us is that we just have to have the political will to change people and make them what we want to make them. Well, we now have a good long century of experiments that have been done around the world. Socialism has been tried and it doesn't work because we're not blank slates.
Well, I hope in our case, in the United States of America, we've just had this election. I think enough people, as you pointed out earlier, have had enough of this detachment from reality. And different communities within America are going back in their own ways and just saying whether they're people of science, reason, religion, or a mix of all of the above. It's to say the American way is really the common sense way. It's just to go back to common sense. And
yes, common sense.
Yeah, I
Who
just
thought
really,
that would have mattered?
yeah. Maybe I'm feeling very optimistic about that.
I am too. Like even the grooming the children's story in the UK that's come forth in the last 2 weeks or so. Thanks largely to Elon Musk and the power of X. It's just transparency. It's like, here's a story. How come we're not talking about that?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, everybody's talking about it. It's like, yeah, how come this wasn't discussed 5 years ago?
So
right? Transparency.
He read, Elon Musk read the court documents and was so appalled by it. And I think he loves humanity, and he just thought, I can't take this. I know I've done a bit of work on it, and once you know those facts, you can't sleep anymore. You've got to do something about it. Mm-hmm. And to have, the world's richest, most powerful, most famous man to take on that subject, I'm just infinitely grateful. I'm thrilled that humanity can produce that level of goodness, even if we produce a lot of evil. And one of the things about these grooming gangs, I think, of across the Atlantic in Britain and in the rest of Europe, they're going to have to come to terms with reality because they've brought in hundreds of thousands, millions of people from cultures that are just different. Their attitude to women is different. Mm-hmm. And if you're not willing to face that reality, then you create the mess that now Elon Musk is trying to force them into fixing.
Yeah. Well, culture still matters a lot. that being an example. And my concern about the people that want to embrace the blank slate is that they're not being realistic about human nature. Just take male sexuality nature, unchecked. And, just guys being free to do whatever they want without any moral guidance or laws and so on, they can act very badly. The whole point of civilization in this particular case, guys, don't do this. You can't do this. And, then the norms and morals shift. And then, guys like my age is like, well, of course we're not going to do these bad things to women. But people in other cultures, maybe they haven't had that guidance.
So my grandmother, who grew up in a nomadic setting, that is in a place where they look after sheep, goats, that's what she used to do. And so that's her background. She couldn't read or write. when I was about 6 or 7 years old, she would point to this piece of sheep fat in the sun covered with flies and ants. And she would say, let me tell you something. So my sister and I wanted to go play outside or play with the boys. And she would say, no, no, no. Look at that piece of sheep fat. That's what you will become. You'll become defiled. And the ants and the flies, and that was her perception of what men were. And then, later on, some evenings when the goats are coming back, the he-goat would jump on the she-goats, and she would point out, and she says, see what happens? That's men. And sometimes she would use the example of a pack of hyenas. And I know, at the time it felt oppressive, of course. But that is the perception of, I was listening to a podcast today of two imams, one from Somalia, one from some other parts of the Middle East. And they're explaining to one another why women are being raped in Europe. And it's this one, he puts on this scholarly manner. It's a podcast setting. He's got these mics and he's going on and he's saying women who wear revealing clothes or who are underclad, that's what's causing all of these rapes. And then he says, think about a piece of meat on a tree and a lion at the foot of the tree, and what happens? Do you think the lion will leave it alone? So these perception of human nature and the perception of male predatory nature, that is something that's really ingrained in humanity, and all of these cultures know it. It's just that it's we in the West who have adopted this unrealistic, rosy-colored perspective that you're describing, the blank slate, and we don't, we don't want to deal with the reality of when you have millions of men who look at women that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
my wife's from Cologne, Germany, and when Angela Merkel opened the borders up to immigrants, oh man, things changed very badly. Her mother got kind of sexually assaulted, not brutally, but just at the train station, just men grabbing her, inappropriately. These are these immigrant men, and if you come from a culture where women are just property or meat, or your example,
sheep fat,
sheep fat, yeah. And again, we know male psychology. Evolutionary psychology, should be taught in every middle school and high school, so that these young boys and girls realize, oh, so this is what guys are like.
This is who we are, actually. Yeah,
we are. There's studies. Some of them are hilarious. How, on the dating sites, how many dates would you need to go on before you'd be intimate with somebody? And for the women, the average was 7 dates. For the men, it was 1.2. So for every guy that said 2 dates, somebody said, why even go out on a date? Let's just have sex, right?
Yeah.
And men are not very picky. Women are very picky. It's another one of these studies that men find 80% of the women on these dating sites attractive that they would go out with and be intimate with. Mm-hmm. Women, it was 4.5%. Yeah. In other words, these poor guys have no chance. The women are very picky, right? Yeah. They're very risk averse, for good reason. Anyway, the point is that if men don't have a culture that says, don't do this, and most men in the West, we've all been raised like this. You just don't do these things. Okay, I won't. And then it doesn't even occur to me to rape and grab women and so on. It just, you don't do that.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It just means society thinks it's criminal if you do it. And
right. Well, it happens a lot less than it used to, right?
It happens a lot less, and it's because society thinks it's a crime, and it's because, and this is what I try to point out, if society doesn't think it's a crime, or that the woman is committing the crime by just being there, or apparently wearing revealing clothes, then we have a clash of cultures, a clash of civilizations, a clash of perspectives in human nature.
Well, Michael, here, Ayaan, I will grant you this. I'm not a religious person, but the conservative Christian worldview of human nature is way more accurate than the liberal woke worldview. I mean, I've written about this. It's like, you guys got it right. I mean, there's a reason those holy books have all those rules and laws that go
Yeah.
on for pages. It's
Yeah.
like, you mean you have to be told this? Yeah, you have to
Yeah.
you have to tell people these things. Don't do here's the things you shouldn't do. Oh, all right.
Michael, thank you so much. It's such a
Thank you,
pleasure.
Ayaan. It's so
Yeah.
good to see you. It'll be good to see you again when you're
Yeah.
statewide in Texas. I think we're going to see each other.
Yes, we're going to see each other in Texas. Yeah, I look forward to
All
that.
right. Cool.
Oh, thank you. Bye.